G'day. Last week I started making a gauge, with a similar sort of application to this one, and got as far as making up most of the piece parts with just a few turn parts to go. This week I've got it all together, and so I'll show a little bit of the fitting together, and then probably end up talking about some improvements. I do plan to put the drawings out, but it seems every time I touch it I think, actually I should change that a little bit, or I should do this. So it's really still a work in progress. The drawings might have to wait for a little bit, a couple of weeks until I settle everything down. I'm making up the final two pieces here, or two major pieces. There's probably going to be a couple of tweaks and holes and things that need to be drilled. This is the adjusting nut that I'm going to be using on the back of the device. And nothing special there. Once again, I've just grabbed something out of the scrap pile, which I think was a bit of stainless. I've knurled it, and then I ran a file over the top of the knurl just to take the sharpness off, beveled the edges as I do, tapped it through M6, and I've also relieved the back there just to make it look a less bulky and bring the tap length down to around about a diameter. The other part that I have to make is a rod, which is tapped on one end, which I've already done, and then the other end is tapped up to the 50mm mark there. And in use, that's going to have the nut on it, and this is going to have the stop, and there's a cross pin that goes in here somewhere. This is black because it's a bit of powder coated rod that I had sitting around the place. There's my, for want of a better term, indicator rod. The inside of that is tapped, and I've got a nut on there, and that's going to lock that in place. There's also a spot down there for a dowel, and that's purely as an anti-rotation device on there. I'm not sure how well that'll work. I may have to make that a slot, or alternately, or perhaps better off grinding that into a diamond pin shape so that it'll actually slide without binding on me. However, that's not the important bit at the moment. I've got a pocket in there which is around about 2mm deep, and I've got another pocket in here which is 2.5, 3. And the idea is that when that is like that and then starts pulling up, that'll compress. Now you can see I've got a gap of a couple of millimeters there, so what I'm going to do is just snip a bit of spring off that'll allow that to go flat. As it is, it's sort of wasted space at the moment, so it doesn't worry me too much. So if I do that, that should pull up to basically yes, there we go, pulls up to flush. So the idea is that when that's, if I can just get that right there, pulled up, as you can see, it just moves the lever. So the idea being that when that starts to pull up, it touches the indicator and starts moving the needle. And so if I then say right, and whether I put a dot on the lens, the whatever you want to call those things, just so that, okay, when that comes around to there, that's when I stop. Doesn't matter too much, but that's the basic idea behind the indication. I've now got a mess of parts, so let's try doing a bit of fitting. Now, there are a couple of M3 tapped holes there, and people may have been wondering what they're for, and the answer is a grub screw. The way I'm going to pivot my linkages here is I've got an M3 dowel, and I'm going to drive that through there, then I'm going to lock it into place with the grub screw, and that's going to sit, pretty much like that, and give me a pivot. I cut a roll pin, to about 16mm, and the reason for that was I wanted something there that would stop that going in and out. Now, originally the drawing called for that dowel pin to be in here, but I've discovered that's a nice sliding fit in the little stop, and sits quite nicely in there. So I'm going to leave that there, but to get that on, it means that I need to basically pre-assemble this, slide that in, and then knock that roll pin through. So that's what I'm going to be doing. But before I do that, so I don't cover up my grub screw holes, I need to assemble this. So this is going to have basically two wings like that. With this in place, and then I'll drill the holes in my legs where they go. This one is easy because that's just another dowel pin that'll sit through there with another grub screw to hold that there. This one, another pin, and then the back here I need to do that second hole and do that on this piece. This is the front mechanism all put together. So I've got my spring roll pin there, and that'll allow that to pull down, as you can see. I'd like a little bit more movement than that, that's better. But this may take a little bit of bedding in. I did take off the top and the bottom of that dowel pin there, just so it was only contacting on the sides. The pins are in, holding these linkages with their grub screws there. Now, I've discovered that I may have done something silly here, in that if you can see there, that pin is wider than it needs to be and is impacting that arm. Similarly, this arm is just contacting the head of this socket head cap screw. So I may have to replace that with a button head, and I may have to shorten that. The next bit is to get this bit going, and so I've got my back pivot there, and I've got my adjustment nut, and I probably need to put a washer in there, but that can come later. And then these need to go in here like that. So I need a hole in here for the pivot. I need a hole in here for the pin and a grub screw to hold that, and a grub screw to hold that pin for that matter. And I need another hole in there for that. I'm going to hold those in the same way here, but with a hole in the back of the back pivot here. So I need to put those in as well. So more drilling and more tapping. Bit more assembly work. I'm using a bit of Vaseline to lubricate things, try and avoid a sort of a bare metal on bare metal contact. But it's basically just, you know, putting those in, putting the pins in, doing up the grub screws from the back. There's the finished device, well, let's say roughly assembled, because there's a few things that I need to do to it. I haven't got the spacers and things in here yet, and it looks like I've got a little bit of misalignment there, so I'm going to have a look at that and see what the story is there. I've probably drilled a hole crooked and need to re-drill that or repatch that up. But I've got a couple of dowel pins in the ends here, and I guess how square those are is another matter too. But there's a 35 diameter ring gauge, and I can't go much smaller because I've got that screw sticking out. So I need to fix that as well. But if I do that right until my dial is starting to move, and I'm going to stop on 0 there. Now that should spring back, so I need to work out what the sticky bit there is. But if I pull that out and then run a micrometer across the ends there, and it's stiff enough that the micrometer is clicking. And that's got me 3496, so that's within 0.04 of a millimetre, and that's encouraging enough that I think I'll persist with this and you know, tidy it up, find out where the sticking places are, and you know, do some more work on it. Because what this means, of course, is if I can get this right, I only need, you know, sort of that much headroom between a bore and a tool, and I can measure it. A couple of things I don't like about this. Most of it works fine, but there's some details, and a couple of you already picked up in this on the comments. These brackets are a little bit on the flimsy side, and so I'll probably end up machining those out of solid. And these brackets are also a little bit flimsy, and I'll end up machining those out of solid. Now you might also be able to pick the hole in through here, and that's certainly square to this back piece, but I'm not quite sure it's 100% square to the what would you call that, the clevis on the end of this arm. And so what I'm going to do, I think, is take this all apart, weld a new clevis on the back, and then come back and re-drill that hole. I'm going to make bigger and use an M4 pin, a 4 diameter pin, but this hole and this hole I think I'll have to re-drill in the mill so that everything is square, because what I have noticed is if there's a slight deviation from square, it tends to twist things up. I mean, it still works as you saw, but not quite as well as it possibly could. I'm also going to, I don't know whether you'll be able to see it there, but counterbore around where this rod goes in, so I can put a spring in here, and that'll help bring this back when measuring, so that it moves a little bit more freely. But I'm hoping a combination of making these pivot points a little bit more rigid and putting a spring in there will make this a more usable tool. First of my mods is done. I've put a what would you call it, a counterbore or whatever, just with a milling cutter in there, so that spring can sit in there, and that will do that, and that should be enough to push the legs apart. I may have to play with that spring a little bit, but it's good enough to start with, I think. The rest of the afternoon has been spent cutting these out. I didn't have any square stock, of course, to do this with, so I've got round stock that I've had to take down. So these two blocks are destined to be a pair of these, and so I'll be machining those up tomorrow. I'm running out of daylight today, and these two are for the back of there, so I'll weld those on, drill them, and then take them out to be a bigger and beefier clevis. I've also countersunk the two sides of the hole here. I'm going to put a bit of 3mm rod in there and weld that and then flush that off and then re-drill that. I figure if I'm going to re-drill that and I need to re-drill that, I may as well re-drill this one and make sure that that one is actually square. I'm just redoing my arms here. I've welded the blocks on the back and then flushed that off, and then here, as you saw earlier, I countersunk that. I've put a bit of 3mm stuff in there and then welded top and bottom. I could have left an air gap, but the trouble is if a drill hits that and it's not quite central, it could flick it off to one side. So I thought, right, I'll fill that and then go over the top of that with the grinder and a file just to flush that off. I've set this up in the mill and I've gone in and centre drilled and then reamed for that and that one. And for this one, I've just gone in with a 4mm slot drill. So that's all good. One of the nice things about doing that welding is that's annealed that material just there, and so it's a little bit easier to process. I decided to put the hole in there because I'm going to be taking some of that out, and I didn't particularly want that to be deflecting when I was drilling. Now, one of the things you could do is if you wanted to take that out first, or for some reason, that's what you've done, you could get something like a block of mild steel, put that in there, maybe a tack or two to hold it, and then drill through. The important thing is it's supported, and that's all you need to really worry about. This is the setup I'm using to put the notch in the clevis there. I've got an angle plate which I've squared to the table. I've got this bit clamped in there, which I then squared to the table as well, so that's basically perpendicular, and then I just run the cutter through and nibble that out until I get to the right depth. I'm going for a thickness of 2mm there, and that's a lot sturdier, so that's all good. The other way of doing that, I could have put that in the vise and run through with a circular cutter, slitting saw, that sort of thing. That would have worked, but I'd done that the other day and couldn't be bothered setting it up again, so this was just as straightforward. It's just a little bit long, so I've got it positioned so that the tail here goes into one of the T-slots, but apart from that, it's working quite nicely. Got my 2 linkage pieces, and they are roughly what they should be. That undercut's a little bit difficult. I had to finish that with a file, so I'm still not 100% happy with that, but I think I'll continue on and come and dress that back up later when there's not as much material. That makes it a little bit easier to shape. But the rest of it, not too bad. The rounding off once again was done using that pin through there on the vise, and then I've run over that with a file, so that's all good. So the next thing to do is, basically I've got it like that, so I need to now, for want of a better term, trench that out, and that'll get me down, and then it's just a matter of cutting out the ends there, which shouldn't be too awful. The method for this doesn't really show up all that well on the camera. There might be a little bit of stuff there, but we'll just have to see what happens when I edit. But basically, starting with that, I have that set up in parallels in the vise on the piece like that, and then I go through and trench that, then kick out to get my exact width. And then it's a matter of setting it on end and coming through, and setting it on end the other way and coming through to relieve the ends. After all that, is it better or worse? Well, sadly it seemed a little worse. The reason for that being is that I think these, links when they were thinner gave it a little bit of flex. Now that they're stiff, it doesn't move as freely. That could be the pivots. I need to possibly work those and grease those a little bit better. The button head cap screw which I put in there now fouls on this thicker link, so I need to relieve that, and also, well, I can do the other side by shortening the screw, I guess. The spring is not strong enough for how stiff this is. That's, I would hope that would spring back nicely, but it doesn't, and you can see from the dial moving there that it's having enough of an effect on the mechanism that it's not working properly. Does it show promise? Yes, it does. I think that a bit more work and this will be a viable thing. I think there's a slight twist in there too, because if you look at the two ends there, one's slightly higher, so I need to work out where that is and correct that. And you can also see here the dowel pins are hitting the dial there too. Now on the drawings I've already raised that up a couple of millimeters to allow for that, but I need to do that. I also need to get those spaces in there, but then that's not a high priority. Yes, it's a work in progress. I'm glad I've made it, and I'll persist with it, but I don't think it's quite ready for the world just yet. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you for the next one.